Lesson number 4 in our 6-part series. This lesson today is called New Beginnings, the Ethics of Reproductive Technologies. Oh, it sounds impressive. Too bad my mother's not here. She'd be very impressed. Okay. Today we're going to be dealing with good things, thank God no one's critically ill, no one's dying, no one's on their deathbed. Oh, Baruch Hashem, thank God. For the first time we're going to be dealing with a very important, sometimes agonizing issue, but hopefully at the end of the day, good results. This, of course, as we're dealing with the new technology when it comes to people reproducing. Okay? And this is going to be a 5-part lesson this evening that we're going to go through. The first part, we're going to talk about the importance of having children, even though that's not really part of the morals and medicine part of it, but we'll see the tremendous importance that the Torah places upon the idea of having children. I don't think that from the Torah's perspective, this idea that we find sometimes even prevalent in the United States, that we're okay, why bring children into the world? Look, it's such a dangerous place, it's a horrible place, why do it? I don't think that's even considered in the Torah's perspective. And also this question of how many people do we need? We started out with 2 and now we've got 6.5 billion. It's overpopulation, where the resources coming from. I don't think that's a consideration, from the Torah's perspective at all. The Torah, the first mitzvah, as we all know, is pru or vu, to be fruitful and to multiply. And that's certainly in the Orthodox world without consideration. Because when we see texts that are brought down, that literally the more the merrier. The more the merrier. Listen, if Hashem blesses you with 3, it's great. 6, better. 9, very good. 12, yasher koyach. 15, God bless you. 18, chai to life. And I think that the winner in Chabad circles, is there's a family, the Schneerson, not to be mistaken with the Rebbe, but cousins of the Rebbe in Kfar Chabad. I think 21. They've topped the scale for Chabad with one wife. I'm not talking about the polygamous Lubavitchers that live in the southern part of Utah. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the monogamous Lubavitchers that live around the world. I think the Schneerson family in Kfar Chabad have 21, one father, one mother, and I think it was all, just regular single births. So, God bless Mr. Schneerson. Something like that. So, that's going to be the first part, and we're going to read some text from it and discuss it a little more. Now, of course, what that does, obviously, is it puts a tremendous amount of pressure on couples to have children. If you're in the world that, this is expected of you, then you want to get going. Unfortunately, there are some times that we can't. Whether it's going to be the male's problem or the female's problem or a combination of both, or in certain cases, the doctors are baffled. And we'll go through some statistics later on. Who's to blame? So thank God, Baruch Hashem, we live in an era of tremendous technological advances when it comes to reproductive technologies, and we're going to discuss 3 things. 3 avenues we're going to discuss. Number 1 is we're going to talk about an outside donor, whether that's permitted according to halacha and how that's looked upon. Number 2 is in vitro fertilization, where the husband is going to be the donor. And number 3, we're going to talk about stem cell research a little bit. Again, I just want to point out, and to be honest, I'm not an expert in stem cell research, but just from a halachic point of view, I'm not talking about what it does and how it works and all of that stuff. From halachic, from a Jewish legal perspective, can we, should we, will we, what's the Torah's point of view? And then we'll wrap up with the idea that even if you don't have children, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, that there's other options, even if nothing else works. None of these, technologies work for you. There's other ways that you could be an absolutely fulfilled person. We'll see. We'll wrap it up. But let's start first with about the importance of having children, and also this idea of infertility, which seems to become part and part with many of the great people in the Bible. Okay? We'll start off tonight's class with a reading from the Medrash. It's on page 116, text number 1. The Medrash says like this: Sheva Karisin. There were 7 infertile women mentioned in the Torah. Who were they? Sarah, Abraham's wife; Rivka, Yitzchak's wife; Rachel and Leah, both of Jacob's wives. Now that's a little bit of an interesting point that they bring in Leah as well, because Rachel was, we know that she was infertile. Leah, it said, had a number of children, then stopped, and then started to reproduce. So even in that case where people have had a couple of children early on and then stop, even though they're trying to have more children and they can't have, we still consider them infertile. That doesn't mean that they're childless. Not to be mistaken, infertile and childless is not synonymous. That means she just can't have any more children, and that's what happened to Leah. She stopped giving birth, and then later on she started to reproduce again. That's why she's included in this section. V'ishtei shel Manoach, the wife of Manoach. Now, anybody know who that is, and who eventually they had children? Who was the son of Manoach? Thank you, Samson. And his wife's name, just so you should know, I mean, it's even though it doesn't say this clearly and explicitly in the Torah, was Tziliponit. Tziliponit was Shimshon's mother's name, and that's why she's probably not mentioned much. It's Tziliponit. It's hard, it doesn't roll off the tongue as wife of Manoach rolls off your tongue. All right? And Chana, we know who she is. She's the mother of Samuel, right? And the last one is Tzion. Now, anybody know who she is? Who's Tzion? And who did she give birth to? So it's interesting that the Gemara includes her, because Tzion is not a woman. Tzion is Yerushalayim, is the city of Jerusalem. And the Gemara includes her because if you read the book of Lamentations, the book that was written by Jeremiah, he talks about Jerusalem being desolate and infertile. Right? So the city, because she's referred to as infertile, she gets included in this set of people that need fertility. Okay, so we see here an interesting thing: the very beginning of the Jewish people. The beginning all started with women that couldn't have children. All 4 mothers, including Leah, which had a couple but then stopped, couldn't reproduce. Now, we have to ask ourselves the question, why is this? I mean, we're talking about here people, Abraham and Sarah, I mean the forefathers and the foremothers, as they are described in the Torah, and in the Gemara, and the Hasidus, and Kabbalah. I mean, these people were the chariots to the Almighty. They didn't have their own will. They were people that were completely dedicated to the cause of Yiddishkeit. I mean, and so the question pops up: why would they have this issue of having children being infertile? There's a number of different answers that are given. One of them is because God loves the prayers of righteous people. The prayers of righteous people. And since, if Abraham doesn't have children and Sarah doesn't have children and Rebecca and Isaac, what are they going to do? They're going to pray to God, and the further that he drags them along, their prayers become much more resolute and more anxious and more, and then this and that, stronger. Eventually, Hashem, gives in, he relents, and he gives them a child because he loves to hear their prayers. Why he has to do this, I don't understand why, but this is one of the answers that is submitted to why Hashem didn't give these people children right away. Okay, fine. We also know about Shimshon, his mother had Shimshon, and we know about Hannah's prayers. We discussed this a couple of weeks ago in class on Saturday morning, how Shmuel's mother, she prayed so fervently, and all of that stuff, and even the idea of Yerushalayim being infertile. Well, eventually what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, the city of Jerusalem is going to bloom, and perfect. Okay. So what do you do? What do you do when you don't have children? So you daven. You daven. Okay. So at this point, let me introduce tonight into the class these idea that reproductive technologies allows us to do. Now, there's a couple of different methods, and we'll go through them just quickly. And then later on, we'll discuss them more in detail. Generally, the idea that we're going to be talking about is called ART. What is that? That's an acronym for Assisted Reproductive Technologies. That's what we're going to be dealing with the class tonight. Assisted reproductive technologies, meaning that you can have children yourself. You're going to go to a doctor, and the doctor is going to then provide you with some ideas of how we can be able to impregnate your wife. Okay? AIH, which is artificial insemination by the husband. It's artificial insemination through the husband. AIH means basically that this is the sperm is produced by the husband and is prepared for a lab, and it's removed and injected into the uterus, so the husband don't have it the natural way, but it's the husband who's giving the things. Then there's AID, which is artificial insemination of the donor, meaning the husband can't do it. He's the one that's lacking the goods. So we go to an outside guy and we say, hey, would you like to make a donation? And he donates, and Baruch Hashem, it works. Okay? You may see sometimes the IUI, an acronym for IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. It's the same idea as what we've been talking about before. I mean, it's another name for AID. Okay? And then there's IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, where then the eggs are extracted from the ovaries and fertilized with the sperm in a petri dish, and then it's re-put back into the mother, and yashakayach. Okay? Then there's ice. You don't have to remember all of these, because this is not medical school here. Okay, and you're not going to become experts in this, but this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And then there's IC, which is ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which is basically a version of IVF treatment where the eggs are extracted, in which a single sperm is injected into the cytoplasm of an egg. This is performed when the sperm does not have an independent ability to penetrate the egg, or are not numerous enough to do so, so they do it for you. Okay? So these are basically the various types of technologies we're going to be dealing with about this evening. Abraham didn't use it, neither did Isaac, as far as we know. As far as we know, that the biblical characters had their children naturally. After a lot of prayers, yes, but they still had to do it naturally. And the reason why we know this is because when Sarah was told that she's going to have a baby, what did she do? She laughed and she wondered why an old woman like me is going to be able to have a baby. So we see that what then did God do? Obviously, he turned back time for Sarah and for Abraham. So they still had to do it the natural way, and they had the baby. It wasn't call it an immaculate conception. That's right. It was not an immaculate conception. It was Sarah actually had to get pregnant through Abraham, and they had the baby. But what God did, the miracle was that he turned back time on Sarah. Okay, so we're fine. Okay. Now we see, he says, look, Abraham is devastated. I mean, he's 90 years old, 100 years old, doesn't have any children, even though he has Yishmael, but he wants from Sarah's most beloved wife. So he says, he cries to God in text 2a, after these incidents, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, fear not, Abraham, I am your shield, your reward is exceedingly great. Because Abraham had worried already. You know what? God had done him so many favors. And God was so good to him. You know, he saved him with the kings in the war, and he gave him riches, and he gave him all of these things. Abraham was worried that this is it. You know what? That's going to be finished. It's over. So God says, no, don't worry about it. You have much in reserve. You have so many great things that are going to be awaiting you. So Abraham says, God, what can you give me as long as I am childless? What do you give me? Well, another $1 million, another $5 million. What worth is it? Who am I going to pass it on to? When I die, it's over, it's finished. Behold, you have given me no seed, and behold, one of my household will inherit me. So what am I working here so hard for? What is all this all about? If I don't have someone to pass it on to, forget about it. It's over. All right? But mostly, what was Abraham worried about? Was he worried about the riches going to Isaac? No. Abraham wasn't worried about the riches. The riches can go to anywhere. He doesn't care. What he was worried about that is if he doesn't have a seed, everything he worked for in Yiddishkeit goes to pot. Goes to pot. It's over. So he needs to have an inheritance, someone that he knows. Ishmael is definitely not going to be the one. He needs someone that he knows that he can give his blessings to, that God gave to him. He could pass it on to somebody else. He needs to have this. And so part of it is that there is this idea within human beings, they have to have a progeny to pass it on to. And again, that progeny does not have to be biological. Just remember that. We're talking about biology right now, but in our minds we understand that the progeny, the next generation, does not have to be biological, as we'll see at the end. But this is a theme that runs through the entire Bible. It doesn't only stop with Moses' death. We go into the book of Samuel, and we find Vatan Chana, and Chana said, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit." We know that Eli, the high priest, came into the tabernacle and saw Chana standing in front of the ark. Her lips were moving, but no voice was coming out, and she looked like she was stoned. Right? She looked like she was drunk. That actually, for her, Proposition 19 passed. Right? She looked like she was high. And she said, he started to scream at her, "Get out of here, woman, you're coming over here, drunk." And Chana said, "No, Lord, I'm not drunk. I'm just a woman that's exceedingly bitter." Why was she bitter? Because her, I don't even know what you call these people, her sister wife, Penina, I guess is what you would call her. Her sister wife had 10 children. Right? And she had no children. This was in the days when the polygamy was still available, was an option within Judaism. So Elkanah, the husband, had 2 wives, Penina and Chana. Penina had produced 10 children, and Chana produced 0. So the score was 10-0 at the end of the half. And Penina used to always dig it into her. Now Penina would say to her, "Oy vey, I'm so busy raising my children," and Chana would be not busy, because he wasn't raising any children. So she would always dig it into her. The rabbis say in the Talmud, and we discussed this when we learned the book of Samuel, that Penina meant well. Why? Because she was urging on Chana to pray harder, to dig deeper, to really, really, really want it. So this is like a back-sided slap. So if you want someone to do something, just make fun of them, or really dig it into them. Like Shorty. I don't know what you could do by that, except maybe you could go to a stretching farm and they'll stretch you out, something. But if you call someone fatso, either one or two things is going to happen. Either they'll get thin because they'll get so sick of being called fatso, or they don't care anymore. They're just going to get fatter and fatter. No, but this is Penina's way of doing it. All right. So she said, "No, what are you, crazy? I think I'm here drunk in the temple. I just want one thing." And what is that? Children. I want children because this is something that's going to pass me. I'm going to be able to pass on, and they're going to pass on, and they're going to pass on. And of course, when Samuel was born, she says, "Elanara zani spalolti." This is the lad that I prayed for, and here he is. He's yours. Take it away and do all of that stuff. And Hannah answered and said, "No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit, and I poured out my soul before the Lord. Out of the abundance of my complaint and my vexation have I spoken until now." So we see here, the importance of having children in the Bible is paramount. There's nothing, it's secondary to anything else. Even Moses himself had children. He had plenty of time. He had time to have children. So there was never a question about people, devoting themselves completely to the service of the Lord. This is not something that Judaism ever demanded or asked or relished or acquiesced to. The greatest rabbis and the greatest scholars all married and had children. Tried at least to have children. Some didn't, and they had ramifications for it. Okay? Probably the toughest one who acted most vigorously was Rachel in last week's portion. Last week there was an interchange between Rachel and Jacob, which was we got an insight into marriage where you don't want to see. Like, you see sometimes people arguing, you really don't, you feel, what do you do when you see people doing that? You feel uncomfortable, you don't want to, it's like seeing a man cry. It's not something you see, a guy crying up there, it makes you feel uncomfortable. Right, but here we have a little bit of an insight of the exchange between Rachel and Yaakov, where Rachel says to Jacob, "Give me children." She says to him, "Give me," right? Isn't that what it says in the Torah? She screams to him, "Give me children." Rachel saw that she had not borne children to Jacob. Rachel became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children. If not, let me die." Okay, let me die, because why? Life without children is death. Now, this is, again, we often talked about in the beginning of the class that this is not a judgment. There are people that don't have any children, and it has nothing to do with what their quality of life. It was in biblical times when you had these multiple wives, and they all had children, and they were busy. And what does Leah say when she has her third or fourth son? She says, "Now I'm going to be the big shot in town," right? This is what Leah says, because I'm now producing the majority of children. And she ended up with half of the tribes came out of Leah, right? So Rachel was dead. The relationship was dead. What did she need? So she screamed, and Jacob answered her back, "What am I, God? I'm not God that's withholding children from you. It's God that's withholding children from you." So here again we see the absolute necessity and almost the obsession with early Bible personalities literally needing to procreate. It wasn't a question of and if. We're going to say, listen, we have a great life. What do you need? Jacob didn't say, what do you, look, Elkanah said that to Hannah. Elkanah said to Hannah, I'm better than you than 10 sons. What do you need more? Look, I'm the best husband there is. Jacob didn't say that. Jacob says, what do you want from me? Go pray. Go do what you have to do. Right? And Rachel eventually prayed, and God gave her 2 sons, and that's the way it goes. Okay? So that's filtered down throughout. That's been part and parcel of what we see here in Judaism, is that this obsession, this idea of having children. And I'll tell you, in our community, the pressure is enormous. If the girl and the guy gets married in January, and by June we don't see a stomach, it's a problem. What's going on? It's only 6 months. I'm not talking about secular Judaism, because there you plan it out. There you sit down, you plan, look, I got to finish law school, you got to get a job, we got to buy a house, the dogs, this and that, all of that stuff. Then, if everything works out, in 6 years, we'll have a child. Not so in the Hasidic community. The first thing is have a child. What about a roof? A job? Secondary. First comes the children. Then everything else will fall into place. So in our community, in Chabad, if you're not pregnant within 6 months, it's a year, they're talking behind your back. 18 months, it's already that parents are tearing their hair out of their heads. 2 years, you're officially considered a nakara. You're officially infertile. That's it, finished. So you have to go to doctors. We have plans for you. I'm telling you, go to a warm climate. Yes, who knows what. They'll give you already ACEs. And that's the way it is. So for people, you could well imagine, for people who have no children in such a highly pressurized society, because after all, even though it's a big community, but it's still a small shtetl in Crown Heights, where the Lubavitchers live. If you've ever been there, you walk a couple of blocks here and there. It's all within a few blocks radius. Everybody knows what's doing in everybody else's kettle. So the pressure is very, 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 very high in such a place, and it's not a question of if. You're going to have children. I didn't sit down with my wife and I say, honey, do you think we're going to have kids? Like maybe we shouldn't have kids. Let's dedicate our lives for saving the rainforest and the Amazon. She would have pushed me out of the car. First date, I would have been right to the curb. Kicked to the curb. That's not even a question that you ask. You don't even ask, how many would you like? How many? Ask him. As many as he gives, that's as many as you get. So that's the way it goes. So if you don't have, it's a serious problem. It's a very serious problem. And here the author comes to an interesting question, just about procreation. This has really nothing to do with the class. I don't know what the relevance of this is, but the question that he ponders to the class is going to be, what is really the idea of procreation? I mean, besides biologically and psychologically, I mean, we know that people, something inside of them want to procreate. For whatever reason, it doesn't have to be specifically Jewish. This is true for the human race. They need to procreate. They just need to have children. And this could be in the rich countries, the poor countries, the warm countries, the cold countries, the industrialized, unindustrialized, the civilized, uncivilized, it doesn't matter. There's something within a couple or a woman, I think more than a man, that needs to have children. You just need to have why? Why? Because then you ask yourself always, 2 years later, what? Is this what I asked for? I mean, what 2 years later? 6 months later, when the kid's crying and spitting up all over the place, and 2 o'clock in the morning, you're going patting it down, and all it's doing is, my daughter, God bless her, now she's, Baruch Hashem, has 4 of her own. She was a colicky baby, Chayaleya. Oh, and I remember walking with her at night, 1 in the morning, thinking to myself, what? This is what we asked for? What did we do? Last year at this time we were free birds. We could go where we want, do what we want, run where we want. And now this 8-pound thing is holding us hostage. Right? What are you crazy or something? And then what? You have another one. And another one. But there's something within ourselves that just we need to have a need. But this idea of procreation, just in the Western world, do we look at it as a right? And what is the significance of this right? Now, and we'll see how Judaism looks at it. So he quotes here from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 16.1. Men and women of full age, without any limitations due to race, nationality, or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. Everybody has this right throughout the entire world. No one has a right to stop them from marrying and have children. Okay? So now we ask ourselves like this. This is just an exercise for discussion. In rights itself, when we talk about human rights, okay, that people have rights here in America, there are 2 types of rights. There's what we call the positive rights and the negative rights. A negative right is something that the government cannot stop us from doing. What would be an example of a negative right?
Security in your own house.
Security in your own house, thank you. What else? Freedom of speech. Perfect. That's right. Freedom of speech. The government cannot stop you from expressing your right to speak freely. That means if you want to call the president a yo-yo, you could call the president a yo-yo. You want to call your congressman a nudnik, you could call your congressman a nudnik. The government cannot stop you from doing this. Another example would be putting on tefillin. What's that called? Freedom of religion, meaning that the government cannot stop you from practicing your religion freely. This is what we call a negative right. It means negative. They cannot stop you. You have the right to do this. And they don't have the right to block you from doing this. What's a positive right? Positive rights are a little bit more subtle. Here he gives an example, but I'm not so sure if this is true in the United States of America. Many governments feel that they have a responsibility of educating their children a certain way. Here, I don't know here, there is a Department of Education, but I don't know if it's a right of every child to get an education. It's not a right. You don't want to, I mean, if you don't send your kid to school, they can send a truant officer back and forth. But if the government felt that it's their responsibility to see that every single child should get a good education, that would not be a negative right, that would be a positive right, meaning they want to do something positive for you. They want to, if let's say universal health care, let's just say that for example, that the government felt that everybody in this country has a right to health care, and they would give it to you. Canada, Britain, Israel, many countries around the world have universal health care, meaning that this is a positive right for everybody that lives in this country to be covered by some kind of health care. We in this country have it too. But it's called different names. In California, it's called Medi-Cal. In New York, it's called something else. For older people, it's called Medicare. Somewhere around the line, you can get health care around. I mean, I was today, unfortunately, in the emergency room at Memorial, visiting somebody, and I'm sitting there. There's a sign in the emergency room. They cannot refuse to give you health service. They cannot deny you service. If you walk in there, they have to treat you. Now, it does say there, they only have to treat you till they stabilize you. Means they don't have to treat you till they put you back on your feet to stabilize you. Then I don't know what they do with you, bounce you out on the street, basically. But at least you'll be stable when you're thrown out. You won't be unstable. All right? But if the government felt that this is a need for everybody to have this would be what we call a positive right. Okay. So, for example, here in the United States of America, having children, a positive right or a negative right? It's a negative right? Yeah, of course, because the government doesn't care. Does the government care if you have children? Absolutely not. But you know what? It's interesting because there are countries in the world that the governments feel that it is a very positive right for people to have children. What would be an example of which country? China. No, China is the opposite. China is exactly the opposite of a positive right. Then for them, it's not even a right. It's a right to have one child. Which country in the world? Israel. Thank you very much. Israel. Israel has pushed since its inception in 1948, has had this plan that Jewish people should reproduce. How do they do that? They give you subsidies. As a matter of fact, it's not only Israel. I remember, Ron, you remember in Canada getting the checks? You know, they're getting in, that's right, in Canada, that's right, thank you. In Canada, you used to get a subsidy for every child. You got a certain amount. I remember when I was a little kid, the checks used to come in, it's like $12, $15.
They got much bigger after we left.
No, now it's more. But you know what? Here in Canada and in Israel as well, they feel that there is a positive right for people to have children. They want you. Well, listen, Canada is the second largest country geographically in the world. It is bigger than the United States of America. The only one that's bigger than Canada is Russia. Canada is the biggest, second largest country, has no people. I mean, you could go vast areas of Canada, you could conquer it and set up shop that no one would know. You can make your own country there. What? Saskatchewan, for example. I don't want to. It's the first shliach they announced. I'm sorry. It's what? Than California. It's less population than California. I was thinking about you, Sam, at the Kinnis HaShluchim. They announced the first time ever a Lubavitcher rabbi is going to Saskatchewan. Everyone said, where? Is that between Vietnam and Cambodia? They thought it's somewhere in the Far East. Where is Saskatchewan? What? I don't know. He lost. He lost a bet to the guy who went to Laos. There's a couple of Jews in Medicine Hat. I think in Medicine Hat, yeah. Oh, Medicine Hat's in Alberta. I'm sorry. I should have known that with the Moose Jaw.
There's a university where
yeah, there's a few Jews. There's a few Jews there.
There were Jewish settlers in Saskatchewan.
Sam's grandparents.
Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Yeah. They were farmers. They were farmers. Okay, so here in America, for example, what would be the difference, positive right versus negative right, in all practical application? What would be the difference if we had Israel or the United States? What would be a practical difference in policy, whether the government viewed childbirth as a positive right or a negative right? What would be a very practical difference between these two attitudes? Whether the government would fund art, right? Artificial reproduction technologies, whether the government would fund this. In the United States of America, the government will not fund this. No. This is not part of what the government will do. You don't have children, you're on your own. You want to go through, and it's very expensive. I mean, these procedures are in the tens of thousands of dollars. Make no mistake, it's very, very expensive. You know, these reproductive technologies, the government will give you nothing. Nothing. Why? because it's a negative right. We don't care. We're not going to stop you from having children. You could go right ahead. And it's interesting that, in America, for many things you need licenses. Like, for example, to drive a car, you need a license. To own a gun, you need a license. To do something, you need a license. The only thing you don't need a license for is, even marriage, you need a license. But children, you don't need a license for. It's an interesting thing, but that's a different story for another time. All right? But here, so in America, it's a negative right. They will not fund it. In Israel, it's a positive right. The government will fund it. You want to have children? We're going to help you. We're going to do everything we can to help you to help you along. Okay, sir.
In China, it's the exact opposite, though. Funds that you get from the government are taken away if you have more than one child. They don't say you can't have it. They say we're taking away money that you get for each child that you have. So there are multiple births there. It's that you're deprived of
income.
You're going to get, yeah.
Right. No, right. China had a different problem. China's problem was there was too many. There was at one point China was reproducing at such a rate that if you took 8 Chinese people and pushed them off a cliff, not that you want to, but if you pushed them off a cliff, it would never end. They were reproducing at this pace. If you kept pushing them just faster and faster, it would never end. This was the reproduction. So, but Israel doesn't have that problem yet. Not yet. They're getting there. They're getting there. I always said you want to solve the Middle East problem, you do it one way. You convert all the Chinese. If you had 1.3 billion Jews, Chinese Jews, I guarantee you the solution would be right there, no doubt about it. You would have no more problem. I think we have about 5. We already converted 5. We're only short 1.2 billion 995 million. But we're getting there. We're getting there. So what happens? So he says, now let's look at, so this is talking about rights. Let's see what happens over here, what the Torah says. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Right? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That is the first commandment God gave to Adam and Eve, to go out there and to do that. Now, this is just, not part of it, but I would like to see Adam's reaction when he found out how he's supposed to do this. Like maybe he thought maybe it was a handshake. Hey, how you doing? Like this, something like that. But that's a different discussion for another time. You understand? But this is something that like Adam was then. Okay, forget about it. Let's just keep going here. All right. But this tells us something. This adds a new dimension. You see, till now we were talking about rights. Now we step it up 1 degree. This is not rights anymore. Rights is things like free speech is a right. Do you have to exercise that right? No. You could be quiet. Freedom of religion is a right. Do you have to exercise that right? Absolutely not. Right? Here, it's not a right. What does it become now? An obligation. It's an obligation. So what does the verse, so here's the first question for discussion, is what does the above verse tell you about the Jewish attitude to reproduction? Is it a positive or a negative? No, it's neither. It's not a positive or a negative right. What is it? It's a commandment, it's an obligation. Means that we don't have a choice about it. We can't sit back and say, yes, we will, no, we won't, we could, we should, we shouldn't. A debate happens. It's like keeping Shabbos. Is this a right to keep Shabbos? No, it's an obligation. Kosher, it's an obligation. Anything, keeping Yom Kippur, an obligation. Same thing, having children. It's not anymore, it's a duty. It's the duty of the husband and the wife. Now in the Talmud it discusses exactly what does this mitzvah mean? And who does this mitzvah apply to? So, and they'll go into many discussions, and this is not really the place and time for a lengthy discussion on who has the obligation, but basically Maimonides will say that it's the mitzvah lays on the man. The mitzvah lays on the man, even though it's funny because it's the woman who does actually the producing of it, and the mitzvah you get when you have a boy and a girl. That's what it is. That's the mitzvah. At the end of the great discussion, why a boy and a girl? Because now they can go out there and they could reproduce themselves into their couples and their couples and their couples. So imagine telling this to my friend Rabbi Blank. Okay? I have a colleague, Rabbi Blank, who had 12 daughters. Okay? What do you say to him? He doesn't get the mitzvah? Finally, his 13th was a son. Baruch Hashem. But he had 12 girls first, and then he had a son. I think he ended up with 15, 13 and 2. I think God was good to him, so he gave the boy a brother, just so he shouldn't, suffer like that. All right? But you can tell a guy, look, you had 12 girls, but you didn't get the mitzvah. It's hard to fathom that. All right? Because this is a mitzvah that's truly beyond our scope. I mean, what do you do if you have 10 sons? You don't get the mitzvah? Or you have only boys, only girls? But that's what the Gemara says. What you should try is to have a son and a daughter. Okay? So many husbands take that very seriously, that mitzvah, and they try hard to have, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But they're always trying, the husbands. Okay, forget about it. Okay, so but it's a right or a duty. This is it. It's the duty of Jewish couples not to sit back and to say when, if, what, but to go out there and try to do it. It's one of the most important mitzvahs to do, and the Talmud tells us in Gemara Shabbos that when you pass away, you get up to heaven. The heavenly tribunal asks you a series of questions to get you into heaven, and one of them is. The first one is going to be about if you're honest in business. That tells you a lot about what Yiddishkeit cares about. Were you honest in business? The other one, and here's the key. Listen to the question. Did you engage in the effort to have children? Okay? Listen to the question. The question is not, did you have children? That's not the question. The question is, did you engage in the effort to have children? That's your business. Your business is to try to have children. Whose business is that? Who has the key to childhood? God. So if he wants to, he gives you. He doesn't want you, he doesn't give you. That's not up to you. Your job is to do it. To go out there and to try to have children to the best of your ability. It is a great mitzvah because the result of all the other mitzvahs can be fulfilled. If you don't have pru or vu, you don't multiply, there's no more Jewish people. The rest of the Torah, for the mitzvahs were given to humans, not to ministering angels. Right? So here, although one has already fulfilled the obligation to be fruitful and multiply, so you could ask a question. So if the Torah says to you to be fruitful, multiply is to have a boy and a girl, so after having a boy and a girl, dayenu, stop. Why do you need to have more children? He says, no. By having a son and a daughter, the rabbis commanded that one should not cease from having children so long as one has the ability to do so. That means it doesn't matter 5 sons, 10 sons, 5 daughters, 10 daughters, because adding another soul to the Jewish people is like building a world. So every child is a brand new mitzvah to have. So besides the mitzvah of actually having a boy and a girl, every child that you have is another mitzvah. And we finish off this part by quoting from the Talmud, the Mashiach, King David will not come until the heavenly chamber is emptied of all of its souls. That means every soul has to find a body. So when it comes to birth, there are 3 partners. There's the Father, there's the Mother, and then there's the Almighty. Right?
You won't be having children after that?
What? We may be having children, I don't know. But Mashiach won't come. He'll create new souls. But at least the hall of souls that we have right now has to be emptied, that every soul has to find a body. Every soul has to find a body. And that's why the mitzvah is to have as many as you possibly can have, because every one is another blessing from Hashem.
We were told many, many years ago by another rabbi that the mitzvah isn't completely fulfilled until you actually have a grandson and a granddaughter.
That's an opinion in the Talmud as well. That is true. That is true. But again, that's the key is, that's not up to you either. You know what? That you could plead and beg and cry and steal and cajole and threaten and do whatever you want. But today, in those days, it was very different. In those days, it wasn't a matter. Here in America, it's a whole different world, today. In the olden days, back in the times of the Gemara, you had a child and your children had children. There was nothing to talk about. As a matter of fact, I tell the famous medrash of a famous rabbi whose father was a wealthy man. We passed away. They wrote in his will that my son will not collect a penny until he goes crazy. Woo! Till he goes crazy. So he went to all of his colleagues and he said to his colleagues, what does my father mean? Until I go crazy. He wants me to go actually stir nuts. None of them could answer. So he was walking around one day in his Shabbos. He was taking a walk down the street, and he was going to the house of one of the most learned men in the community, a great tzaddik and a scholar and a tana. And he goes to his house on a Shabbos afternoon, and as he's about to bang on the door, he looks in the window, and what does he see? The rabbi? The rabbi's on the floor on all fours, and he has 3 children on his back, and he's running around the room. I mean, if whoever was a father with small children, we could do that in the olden days. And you run around the room, and the kids are on your back, and he's on a choo-choo train, or a horse, or a donkey, or a mule, whatever thing he is. And the guy thinks to himself, wow, the guy is crazy. Now a light bulb went off in his head. His father said he will not get a penny until what? He gets married and has children, and those children, then he gets a penny from the Yerusha. Then he goes crazy with the children on the floor. That's the key to life. That's the key to what it's about. So here, again, is the idea that children are of the utmost importance. And that's why we put such a strong emphasis on the next part that we're going to do is, if unfortunately, God forbid, we find ourselves to be in the position of a Hannah, we find ourselves to be in the position of a Rachel, or of a Sarah, and one of these mothers who cannot have children, whether it's the woman's fault or the man's fault, because it usually breaks down to statistics, really will tell you that 1/3 usually is the woman, 1/3 is the men, and of the remaining third, it's broken down to 50%, a sixth is usually both, that there's a problem in each one of them, and the other sixth is the most devastating because the doctors they don't know what's wrong. I mean, it's just not happening. I mean, the husband's okay, the woman's okay, it's just not working. So that's basically roughly how it breaks down. Now, since we talk about the importance of having children, you can imagine the intense pain that this causes to infertile couples. Especially the whole idea of having children, of bearing children. Think about this, if you're one of 10 children, okay, and your brothers and sisters are getting married, they're all having children, and you're sitting without children. I mean, it's almost unbearable. It's almost unbearable, the kind of pressure and the pain that this causes, it causes you. So, we've got to start looking for outside help. So till years ago, what was our solution? We only had one. Adoption. That was the only solution. You could go out there, you can adopt, and there's a lot of text about adoption, in the Torah and in the Talmud, who you should adopt and how you should adopt and what we should do and all of these things. But thank God to technology today, there's other options, and let's discuss some of these options vis-a-vis how they look in as far as halacha is concerned. Now here, I should just read to you a text from the Gemara Chagiga. Lest you think that this never happened, that this artificial insemination is a newfangled idea here in America, let me read you a text. It happened once upon a time that a girl went into a hot bath and she became impregnated. Okay, now listen, can this happen or can this not happen? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I find it to be extremely unlikely that you go into a bath that some guy has been in there and has left a seed in the bath, and somehow you go in there as a virgin and you walk out pregnant, is quite an unlikely possibility. I mean, you may tell that story. Yeah, you may say the story, but that the chances of this actually happening is slim. But whether this could happen or this cannot happen is not really the question. The question is the Gemara was discussing this. The Gemara discussed this woman went to a bath, she got pregnant, she's a virgin. Okay? She's a virgin. She's been checked, she's still intact, everything, her virginity is intact, and she's pregnant. All right? How do you think they came up with the story of Immaculate Conception? You think some guy sat down and thought about it? It's all in the Talmud. I told you, everything that they have comes from the Talmud. Everything. All right? So now what's the question? The question is, since the high priest has to marry only a virgin, a psula, can he marry her? She's pregnant and she's a virgin. Can the high priest marry her? I was back and forth and back and forth. The answer is yes. Why shouldn't he be able to marry her? She didn't do anything wrong. She just got pregnant. She don't know who the father is, but that's a small technicality here, really here in this discussion. Yeah, the high priest can marry her. Okay, fine. What does this tell us? This tells us that there is this idea of what is it called? What am I thinking about? Artificial insemination, right? She had no relation and she got pregnant. So there must be a way of having a baby without having to go through the steps, the normal steps. Okay, fine. Okay, I only brought this down because just to tell you that it's not, the Gemara already was discussing this. And halachic authorities have been discussing this ages and ages and ages about how to artificially inseminate somebody. Okay? So now we come to this question. The first question is a donor. The doctor tells the guy, sorry, you ain't having any. You were born with no good sperm. That's it. Okay, so what do we do? So we go out there and put a notice in the newspaper looking for a donor, to help us. And someone comes forward and he wants to donate. Okay, we had it. It's done here in America. We have donors. What? No, that's not surrogate mothers. But we're talking about donors who are going to help this couple, this infertile couple. What would the Gemara say about this? What would Judaism say about a donor? Yes, no, maybe. What? Okay. Yes. Anybody think that the Torah would agree to a donor? And think about this. The people want to have a child so badly. Oh, please, I want to have a kid. I don't care who it. The husband is going to raise the baby. The donor is, what's the donor? Another guy. We don't even know who the donor is. Some guy. Anybody here feel that the Torah, the Talmud, halachic authorities would say yes to this?
Well, they said yes to Sarah letting the husband.
Well, that's a concubine. Yeah, that's yes. But a donor with the wife, because you're talking about a donor with the wife. And we're not talking about having relations. We're not talking about having relations over here. We're talking about, artificial insemination. We're going to just take it and inject her and have a good day. We don't know, and the husband will be the father. Anybody thinks yes?
Well,
Could it be it says you're not supposed to lie carnally, is what it
Right.
So if it's artificially done, you're not actually doing that.
Okay, that's a good Talmudic thought. Unfortunately, if you look at the verse completely, you'll see that the verse implicitly states about seed. And look at the text in Vayikra. This is taken the text on page 121, text number 6. You see text number 6? It says, "You shall not lie carnally," and what is the next word? Giving seed to your neighbor's wife. That means that giving the seed into your neighbor's wife is a no-no. Now, here is a perfect halachic argument, because on one hand, Lee is right. It says laying carnally. So if you don't lay carnally, but just giving the seed may be okay. Go back and forth, but it said giving the seed. So it was a discussion for about 3 minutes, because they knew in their gut that this is a no-no. Why? For 3 reasons. Number one, most people and authorities would consider this an act of adultery. An act of adultery, because adultery itself doesn't have to be, the end result doesn't have to be pregnancy. What if they have relations without and she doesn't get pregnant? Doesn't make a difference. It's still adultery. So giving seed from a foreign husband, from a foreign man into a woman, it smacks of adultery. It smells of adultery, and therefore it's considered adultery. Even though it's not considered adultery in the sense that you could kill them, that means you're not lying carnally. I don't think they would get the death penalty for it, which would be the case if it was really a relationship. But it's a kind of adultery, because what you are is you're passing seed from a married man into a married woman, or unmarried man into a married woman, and that's a violation of the marital bond, and that's considered adultery. Forget about it. It's no good. Most authorities would say, it's not fair. Are you crazy? That's what they would say. Are you a mishuganer? If they would come to the office. Number 2 is a little bit goes outside of the box, but most authorities write that if we permitted this, right? If we permitted a donor from giving seed to a woman, What would that weaken? The institution of marriage. Who needs a schmuck? I mean, who needs a you'll scratch that from the tape. Who needs a husband around? Who needs a husband? Right? The whole idea, oh yeah, I want to get married because I want to raise a family, I want to do this. If the rabbis say, hey, you could ask for a donor, put a notice in the newspaper, you don't think people are doing it now? People are doing it now. Because there's a statistic I saw over here, that 80%, many in Israel, Israel is a whole different ball game. It's not a religious, it's a secular, come from unmarried women. 80% of requests for donor seed come from unmarried women in Israel. It's not the married couples who are out looking, it's the unmarried women. They want to have a child, but they don't want to have the big idiot along with it. They don't want to have this guy bugging them. So they want to have a kid, they want to raise the kid, they want to have a baby, and they don't want to have to make breakfast for the guy, they say hello to him, bother him, this, that, this. I don't need this. Okay? So we'll go out for a donor, thank you, Yeshakayach, here's your 20 shekels, have a good day, get lost. Okay? Goodbye. All right? So what does that do? Ultimately, it ruins this whole institution of marriage, of having two parents, and a father and a mother, raising a child, all of that stuff. So again, so the rabbis say, oh, if we allow a donor, it's all over. You could forget about that. Forget it. Then there's the whole issue of knowing your roots. Identifying who you come from. Who are you? Now, if you allow a donor to impregnate a woman, so is the kid a kohen? If the donor is a kohen, what if the donor is giving you 5 donations? He's a very charitable guy in town. You can't know. So he gave Mrs. A one kid, Mrs. B another kid, Mrs. C another kid, Mrs. D and Mrs. E. Unbeknownst, he's 5 towns, he has 5 kids. Mrs. A has a son and Mrs. B has a daughter. They grow up and what happens? They go off in college. They meet each other and they fall in love and they marry each other. What's the kid? A mamzer. The kid's a mamzer. This is an incestuous relationship, right? Because what happened is over here, a brother and a sister married, unbeknownst to each other. We didn't know. So to this whole issue of yuchsin, the whole idea of family roots, could be upset. So you don't know what's going to be going on, and therefore it's completely outlawed. Most poskim, 99% of the poskim would say, poskim I mean by halachic authorities, will say this is a no good. Even in adoption, it tells you, most authorities will tell you it's better to adopt a non-Jewish child and convert it than adopting a Jewish child. Because you don't know about the Jewish child, who, what, when, and where, and how they came, and who the parents are, and what. So a non-Jewish child, you have nothing to worry about. You adopt the child, and you convert the child. So it's not a problem. Jewish child, you have all of these issues with yichud, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, for these three reasons. Number one, it's not idolatry. It's adultery. Number two, it's going to weaken the institution that we call marriage. And number three, it will upset this whole idea of family roots and family marrying one another. The rabbi said, Rabbi Lezer said, a man should not marry one woman in one province, another woman in another province, lest the children be paired with each other, resulting in a brother marrying a sister. So here you see very, very open that, you know what, you've got to be very careful about family dynamics. One wife, one family, one woman, that's the way it should be, and you've got to be very careful. Twins, and here he quotes from where is it? From Reuters, right? Yeah, I'm sorry.
What if it's your brother that's the donor?
That's only under very specific conditions, and the Torah allows it. You're talking about a Yavoma. You're talking about a Levirate marriage. Yeah, it's a marriage. It's a marriage because the brother is dead, so she's not a married woman anymore.
He's talking about the guy who's sterile, and his brother. And
his brother becomes the donor.
And why would that be better than a foreigner?
Then you know the background.
Yeah, but we're not. But you see, the problem is like this. The problem is that we're not working about one specific case here. See, if it was just one specific case where we would isolate the donor and know that, hey, you know what? This is the donor. We know that it's Mr. X. right? Mr. X is the donor. Okay, they're fine. We could isolate that individual case. The problem that we're referring to over here is if it's allowed, take it outside of the boundaries. So if you allow a brother, then what about a brother-in-law?
Okay, but
You see, so then you start with the family dynamics. You start expanding it. Once you start expanding it, you're still gonna break it down. And then what about if the brother is the donor, and then unbeknownst to the family, the brother then goes to his own town and has a number of children away there. So you have here the brother has a family here, and the brother has a family there. You'd still have the issue of this, of commingling.
okay, but let's say that the widow,
Okay.
okay, when the husband dies, the widow's supposed to marry
Yes.
the brother.
Yes.
Am I correct?
That's correct. But that's a marriage. See, that's a marriage. That's not an outside donor.
The same thing.
That's not an outside donor.
You're just saying. He could have gone to another town.
If he did, so if he had another child with another wife, they can marry. They can marry. Now, we're supposing that this guy has no children. If someone comes along and says this guy has a child, then the levirate marriage is off, even if he has with somebody else a child, not with this woman. But we're supposing, and we're trying to the best of our ability to find if he does not have any children. Now, the question is that if you want to expand your thought and then say, hey, look, anybody could go along and have 3 families. I know a guy here, here he had children to Hebrew Academy. In my son's class, it turned out this guy was having 2 families simultaneously. He was a doctor, and not to say that doctors are doing this, commonly. I'm not saying that they do that commonly. They may, but in this case, the guy was an OBGYN, and he used this position to simultaneously have 2 families on 2 sides of town. So one side he said, "Oh, there you have I'm giving my patient is in the hospital." He ran to one, back and forth, and he had children from both families and both wives, and that could happen anytime. But as soon as you open the door, it's all this slippery slide thing that if you open it, why a guy would want to do that? Nicht. You have to spend so much time covering up on your lives, you just lose the whole fun of just, okay, forget about it. I'm just thinking to myself, why would the guy want to do that? Okay, so here we have here in Reuters, they reported twins who were separated at birth and raised by different families, met later and married, but were forced to break up when they discovered their true identities. It's a tragedy for the couple who are involved, a great tragedy. Everybody's hearts will go out to people caught up quite unwillingly in the case of incest of this kind. David Alton, a member of the House of Lords, told BBC Radio. It involved the normal birth of twins who were separated at birth and adopted by separate parents. They were never told they were twins. They met later in life and felt an inevitable attraction. They got married. When they did not come to their true identities, when they came to know their true identities, it led to having them separate and also a lot of heartbreak, Alton said. He believes in an open adoption, that you know who the parents are. They tell you know who your parents are. You have to do that. It will be a terrible act of deception with the state colluding in that deception to remove the biological identity of your father from the birth certificate. Pat Hodgkins, head of a group that helps adults affected by adoption, said the story of twins is very tragic. It is a lesson that we need to learn and apply to the situation of donor-conceived children, she told Sky News. Whilst nowadays it would be the most unusual for siblings to be separated, the risk of secrecy affecting the lives of people born as a result of egg and sperm donation is exactly the same as the risk of having adopted people in the past. So here again, it says that just because it's another reason to say that donor artificial insemination by a donor is categorically prohibited by most poskim. But I just wanted to read to you just a little bit of what Reb Moshe Feinstein, remember we kept referring to Reb Moshe Feinstein, what he says. And this is what he writes. Reb Moshe Feinstein ruled that the artificial insemination by donor was not prohibited. Okay? I'd say 99%, there's always 1%. Okay, this is Reb Moshe. Though he advised against it because the husband has not fulfilled his obligation to the use of donor sperm, and moreover, it may lead to strife in the marriage. He maintained that even if a woman underwent AID without her husband's knowledge, it could not be considered equivalent to adultery. I mean, she didn't tell him. She went ahead and she said, "Why do I have to bother him for? I'm going to go to the clinic. I'll be in gym days. I'll get pregnant." And what's he going to think? He's the father. He's the father. Key rules, this is not considered adultery. Remember Lee had brought that up about lying carnally and giving seed. Reb Moshe says this is not adultery. nor would the child born of such a procedure be considered illegitimate. He further suggested that because donor sperm comes from a bank, right? You don't know. You go to a bank, you pick up, you say, okay, who's this guy? He's 6'4", blue. Oh, okay, fine, good, yeah. What's his IQ? Oh, great. There is a presumption that the sperm comes from a non-Jewish donor. You could say in halacha, because it comes from a bank, and the most banks have mostly non-Jewish donors, that you could say that this was a non-Jewish guy. And this alleviates the concern about the child someday engaging in incestuous relationships. Because since the father is not Jewish, so even if he had children from another wife, it's not going to matter because they'd have to convert, and if they converted, then they would not be considered brother and sister, so you don't have to worry. While many disagree regarding the permission to use donor sperm, some poskim agree that post facto there's no issue of yuchsin. That means they will tell you, do not do it. Even Moshe would say, I'm not prohibiting it, but I'm suggesting do not do it because of many of the problems that it's going to lead to. But if she went ahead and did it, if the wife went ahead and said, you know what, I want it, I'm doing it, and came home, the child is legitimate. And there's no issue of problems of marrying later on somebody else. You don't have to check into who the father was, because the father of this child is considered presumably to be a non-Jewish man, so there's not a problem with yuchsin, meaning family roots. You know, or they call it, there's another word for it, yichis is pedigree. You don't have to worry about your pedigree. I mean, where you come from, that's where Moshe. The Rebbe, on the other hand, was exactly the opposite end of the spectrum. Even though the Rebbe was a very kind, gentle, loving, when it came to this, he vehemently opposed the issue of donor sperm. Vehemently opposed it. Because there's so many problems in this that you bring into the house. What do you need it for? It's a tzara. Okay. What about the husband? So now we know about the donor. What about the husband now? What could be a problem? Why should there be a problem? Why would halacha look askance at this issue? Why should there be a problem? Because in Judaism there is this obsession with only allowing intimacy for what purpose? Procreation. That's it. If you spill seed, we know if you read the early parts in Genesis, we're going to have in a few weeks' time, there's a fellow by the name of Judah. He has a couple of sons, Or and Onan. And Or and Onan, they married this woman, and they don't want to have kids. And they spilled their seed. Right? What's punishment they have? They were killed. God immediately killed them, right? So the spilling of seed for not the purpose of this is paramount in Judaism to murder. Okay? To murder. So here we have a husband that wants to donate seed to his wife. We have to make absolutely sure, 100%, like it's more important to have a mashgiach here than it is to have a kosher chicken or to have a kosher beef. There you have a shaykhit and a boidik, someone that checks it, someone that looks over it, and all different procedures. Here it's even more careful. You have to go through a number of different procedures in order for it to be okay. But what happens? So look at the case. So even though you would think that in a controlled laboratory situation, you would think that this would be no problem, right? Husband, wife, donor, his wife. What's the chances of a mix-up? Small, right? 1%, 5%, 8%. It's a small. Yet, a white woman from Staten Island who gave birth to a black couple's baby after an embryo mix-up at a fraternity clinic was denied visiting rights to the boy yesterday by an appeals court. Okay? A 5-judge appellate panel of the state Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the case was similar to a mix-up at the time of a hospital's discharge of two newborn infants, which should simply be corrected at once. That means if Family A was given Family B's baby, and Family B was given Family A's baby, what do you have to do? Even if Family A says, no, this is much cuter than my kid. You know what, I'd like to keep this kid. I'm sorry. Or the kid said, look, he went from some guy to Bill Gates, and somehow he got lucky and Bill Gates took him home, and he doesn't want to leave now. Because he has to go across the railroad tracks. The court says, no, what do you have to do? Immediately switch the kids, and that's it, and finished. No questions asked. That's the same thing is true over here. even though she carried it. She carried the embryo. Okay? Rather than one in which the mother retained some rights, no rights. The white woman, Donna Fasano, 38, was mistakenly implanted with the embryos of Deborah Perry Rogers and Robert Rogers of Teaneck, as well as her own embryos, by a Manhattan clinic in 1998. In December, she gave birth to 2 boys, one black who she named Joseph and one white who she named Vincent. Now, I want to see the face of that father. That looks like an Italian name, Fasano, right? I mean, I want to see the father's face when that kid comes out black, and when he said, "Oh, Greg, congratulations, Mr. Fasano, you have a set of twins." "Oh, Greg, look at that. Tony and Vinny, I can't wait. We're going to go." There's a slight little trouble. One of them got burnt in the incubator. You see, we put him in there for too long. By mistake, the nurse turned up the heat a little bit. So just don't freak out when you see him. All right? I mean, yeah, she has a lot of explaining to do, the mother, right? Until she convinced him. "Oh, no, what are you kidding me? You know, they're your kids." Miss Perry Rogers was implanted with her own embryos, but she didn't produce a fetus. So she had no kids. Mrs. Fasano had hers and Mrs. Rogers' kids. So what she have to do? She had to give Mrs. Rogers, which I'm sure Mr. Fasano had no problem doing, as he was living in Howard Beach, probably among those, the things. So I'm sure he had no problem giving away the black kid to its rightful parents and keeping this kid. But here just wanted to prove that it's just, it happens. So what do you have to do? You got to have a procedure. That's all halacha says. Halacha will allow it. Most codifiers and most poskim authorities will allow it, but there has to be a procedure. Now, it's interesting. We had met many years ago. This was probably around 15 years ago. UCI, which is the next case, had this great fertility clinic. And there was these 2 lawyer doctors from South America. I don't even remember their names. We went to visit them to solicit them. Myself, Rabbi Newman, went to solicit these guys for a donation. They were doing big business. And they were South Americans, they were charitable people. And I remember him, we sat in the office maybe about 3 hours, for 3 hours, and he was telling us that he just recently got the okay from the Pope, that his method of IVF was kosher v'yosher according to Catholicism and according to Orthodox Judaism. But he wanted to explain to us the difference of procedure, how it works in the Catholic Church and how it works in the Jewish world. We were fascinated. He says he got a call from he had applied here to the local diocese that he would, because listen, there's a lot of Catholics here in Orange County, and he wanted to get the stempel, the seal of okay from the Vatican. So he applied here to the diocese. The diocese read through his proposal, and they said, "We'll get back to you." They got back to him a couple of weeks later, and they said that if he's ready and be willing, he should we take a trip to the Vatican. And he said, "Yeah, okay. Yeah, listen, this is big. If you get the stempel from the Pope himself, you're gonna do big business here in Orange County. No problem." He flies to the Vatican, expecting to meet the Pope. The Pope at that time was Pope, I think it was John Paul II. John Paul II was the Pope at that time. Okay. He comes there. He's this big shot doctor here from Orange County. He's coming here to meet the Pope. Before you meet the Pope, you had to go through 5 different committees. Committee 1 was the young guys. He came in a group that was about 10 priests sitting in the Vatican. He came in, they all had folders sitting around the table, everything is ornate there. They fed him nicely, well, treated him well, put him up in a hotel, everything nice. Day 1, he sat from 9 o'clock to 9 at night with these 10 guys. Everyone had, and they grilled him. These 10 guys grilled him. What's this, what's that, how's this done, how's that done? He was blown away. The amount of knowledge that these guys had, that these 10 priests had, okay, Mazel tov, you passed stage number 1. Next day, he had to sit with 5 senior priests. Again, 9 in the morning to 9 at night, grilling him. Every aspect that yesterday he went over, had to go over again in more detail, back and forth. And how is this done? What's the procedure? What do you do here? What do you do there? Back and forth. Day 3, 3 guys, senior priests already. Okay? Next, again, 9 to 9, 12 hours grilling him. Back and forth, over and over again, questions. They knew more about the procedure than he did. He was the one that invented this whole procedure. And each time he came in, everything was prepared on the table. Binders, charts, everything. The next day, he met with the Pope. Today's the Pope, with Ratzinger and a couple of guys, because this is already taking serious step. Once you pass through the 3, he met Ratzinger, and Ratzinger sitting there with a few old senior guys grilling him again. 4 days he passed. They say, okay, tomorrow get ready. Tomorrow's the big day. Tomorrow's the big day. He got up early in the morning. He got to put on his fanciest suit. He's ready. He's nervous. I mean, this is, you're meeting the Pope himself. He comes in. The Pope is sitting there. Pope sits a little higher than everybody. They all come in. There's a whole group there. He puts his briefs down. The Pope is sitting there with a thing. The Pope starts to ask him a few questions, start to groom him back and forth and back and forth. This didn't take 12 hours. He didn't sit with the Pope for 12 hours. He sat with the Pope for a half an hour, and they said, thank you very much, Doc. We'll be in touch. He leaves. The next day they called him. They said, congratulations. The Pope looked over. Mazel tov. Okay? This was the Vatican. From the Vatican, he flew to Israel. He wanted to meet with Rabbi Eliashov. We talked about Rabbi Eliashov. Okay? This is how Judaism works. They say, you want a meeting with Rabbi Eliashov? Come 12 o'clock midnight. That's when he can see you. 12 o'clock midnight? Yeah, he'll see you 12 o'clock midnight. All day he's busy. He's teaching. He's meeting with this. Come 12 o'clock midnight. He comes 12 o'clock midnight. Where did Rabbi Eliashov live? In Mea Shearim. You have anybody been to Mea Shearim? Mea Shearim looks a little like the Vatican. If the Vatican was bombed by American bombers like in World War II for about 12 weeks, night and day. That's how Mea Shearim looks. The houses are small. He's led down this little room. He comes into this little room. The walls are lined with svarim. On the table is svarim stacked up. Behind the seat is this little Rabbi Yosef. I told you about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He was about 4'10". I think Rabbi Yosef was taller. He was 4'11". Okay? And he's sitting over there with 8 Gemaras, 12 books. He spends 10 minutes with the guy. 10 minutes with him. He says to him, tell me the procedure. He's like listening to him. Okay, kosher. Have a good day. See you later. Good night. That was it. He went home. He got the Vatican, the rabbi, both done. 1, 2, 3. He's in. This is the guy that's now arrested in jail. The fugitive, because you know what he did? You know what these guys did in UCI? They were selling the eggs to everybody. I mean, these guys are the most immoral, corrupt guys. I mean, lives. They were playing the God. They were literally playing God. The mishandling of eggs and embryo. When I read this story, I got sick. The guy was so charming in his office. The stories he was regaling us was just unbelievable. How many lives he helped. And when you think about it, we knew people. We had people staying in our house that were his clients. That, you know what? And he was God. Literally, he walked down the street. I mean, this was a big clinic here at UCI. The shame. My stomach was killing me for days, thinking how we were sitting in the office and what this guy did to people's lives. And you see what happens over here when people are infertile. The last hope was going to this guy and crushing them. I mean, the guy ran away. He's now living in Mexico. It's a horrible thing. But you can read. I'm not going to read the whole page. But you know, here was the problem. The problem was there was no method on. There was no regulation that was going on. Here, what they're asking over here, what Richard Morris and Lisa Friedman are saying, everything is regulated in America. Doctors, you don't have regulations? Today, unfortunately, the man passed away. I went to visit him in the hospital. He passed away. To get his body released, you know what you need to get his body released? Guy's dead already. He ain't doing anything. Okay? To get his body released, you had to have first a doctor come in, say that he's dead. I knew that he was dead. I mean, I asked him a few questions. He didn't laugh at any of my jokes. He said, he's gone. He's a goner. Finished. End of discussion. And he was finished. That's a sign of the brain was dead. Forget it. You had to have a doctor there. Okay? The doctor had to give his license number on a form. Had to do this. Had to do that. They had to fax it back to the mortuary. The mortuary had to come. Get a death certificate from the county. Rules and regulations. The hospital would not release the body until every piece of paperwork was signed by the right guy. Every regulation has to be the I's dotted, the T's crossed. You know what's not regulated? These laboratories. These IVF laboratories. They're not regulated. Anybody wants to open up a clinic can open up a clinic. So here you have to have, and this is what our people are begging for. Everything in the world has to have regulations except this. And you see what's happening.
Well, that's changed
Since then, yeah, since then it's happened. I mean, because it took a kick in the stomach for everybody to rise up and to do this. You know, it's unbelievable. Therefore, so what does he write? So the Divrei Malkiel writes, one of the codifiers writes, therefore in this case, the case of the father wanting to be the donor, it is my opinion it's forbidden to do it. He absolutely forbids husband artificial donation. It is not worth trying to be too smart. They should place their trust in God, who will bless them with healthy children. We have been commanded to fulfill the obligation of procreation in a natural manner, though not through methods which can cause problems and are close to being forbidden. So there was, after this incident, some of the poskim, some of the rabbis came out sharp against husband donating sperm to their wives, because even with all of the procedures and all of the regulations and everything, you do careful step by step by step, it's still, God forbid, it was gone. Anyways, I just want to let you know that this Rabbi Tenenbaum, the Rabbi Malkiel Tenenbaum, he's of a minority opinion. Very minority opinion whatsoever. This didn't happen afterwards. I mean, he lived before this, but he was of a minority opinion. Most codifiers will still allow this to go on. In a case where there is permission to perform AIH, what's AIH? Artificial insemination husband. Okay, the procedure must be very well supervised to ensure that the husband's sperm is not mixed with the sperm of another man. This supervision is a prerequisite for allowing the procedure. It is impossible to record in writing the method of supervision, for all this depends on the trustworthiness of the physician and the particulars of the procedure. It is important to be aware that any defect in the supervision can destroy the whole enterprise. Okay, so therefore, Rabbi the Tzitz Eliezer, who we've had before, we've talked about him beforehand. He says it is permissible, but procedures have to be followed. And what's the best case scenario? That the doctor is a God-fearing person. If the doctor is a God-fearing person, go ahead with it. Because no amount of paperwork, if the guy is... well, if it's like these people, unscrupulous people, no amount of paperwork is going to help. So the best thing is to find health professionals who are not personally familiar with the limitations that are integral to their partner's religious commitments, can be incredulous that such restrictions could be allowed to frustrate or complicate the fertility therapy if the couple has a real desire to conceive. Because you tell them, no, we're not going to allow them to go to your clinic unless these procedures, these 10 procedures have to be followed. And most practitioners will say, why are you crazy? These people want kids. We do a good job. Do you follow the procedure? You guys are crazy. You want glatt kosher? Yes. We only want glatt kosher procedures. We're not interested in regular kosher. We want to go the extra mile. Such value judgments have no place in the patient-doctor relationship. Fertility therapy, like all legitimate medical therapy, must address the patient as a whole. The religious commitments of a patient must be at the core of his or her personal identity. Understanding these commitments can help the physician construct a therapy protocol best suited for the patient at hand. This was not written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, nor a follower of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It was written by the doctor, Richard Grazi, and Joel Walowelsky. The use of cyprosperm and pre-embryonic temporary Jewish law and ethics, jlaw.com, if you want to know exactly the situation. Okay, examples. What are some of the things that we want to ask? If God forbid you're going to, I shouldn't say God forbid, but if you're at the point where you're going to go in, or your children or family members are going to go in for something like this, what are some of the things you want to ask? You have this. What qualifies a good supervision? What is the best way to procure the sperm? Can these procedures be undergone at any time or only after attempting a more natural route of conception? Can these procedures be done in order to enable a birth to a third or fourth child? Let's say they wanted to have 10 children. They made up in their mind they want 10 children. After 4, she stopped giving birth, but they still want more. What's it called? Octomom, right? She had already 6, right? When she have 8 more, right? Aside from using IVF to overcome infertility, can it be used as a means of screening potential fetuses for Tay-Sex or other genetic diseases? We're going to go into that at another time. If already doing IVF, is it permitted to select the gender? Can you do that? Is that possible to do that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. Yes. You could select a gender. Okay? Can you do that? Sounds very Nazi, like I'm sorry to say. It is, yeah. Is it permitted to extract sperm from a non-married man and freeze it for the future? If he, God forbid, has cancer, you know, and he's going to go through chemotherapy and we don't know what's going to happen. Can you do that? It's another question that can you do it? Can you do it to someone who died? Husband died in a tragic accident. Can you extract sperm from him and use it? You know, I mean, he's gone already. It's another question that can, is it permitted to, you know, for all of these questions, I mean, I wish I could answer them with certainty. We could speculate about them, but if God forbid something like that would happen, you'd have to go to we'd have to go to a serious guy who deals in these fields and get the answers. But generally, not a problem if it's done according to procedure. The next part is stem cell research. Stem cell research is a big, it's a massive issue here, because it's going to go through, because this is not only affects infertile couples, it affects general medicine in general. Now we have a machlokes haposkim. There's two great codifiers that had a huge disagreement in this. One of them was called President Bush, and the other one is called President Obama. They had a major disagreement on how to proceed with stem cell research. Where does halacha fall in? Let's just go over quickly where the two presidents. President Bush came from a fundamentalist Christian perspective. What happens with stem cell research? Again, I'm no expert, and please, we have doctors here in the room who are far more advanced than I am. If I say something that's incorrect, please don't be shy to correct me. Stem cell research is, of course, the mothers, you take a number from eggs, they're fertilized, you implant a number of eggs into the mother. What happens to the rest of the eggs? You either hold them, you freeze them, whatever you do with them. They're sitting in a freezer. Their embryos haven't been implanted into the mother. The mother gets pregnant. Yashakayach, thank you very much. Her wishes are now fulfilled. As a mazel tov, she has triplets, which often happens when you go through these, do these procedures. And now what happens to the eggs in the freezer? This is the question. Okay? So eggs in the freezer. What are they? Are they people? Now they're rich in scientific, they're rich, we have their stem cells, and they're very rich in scientific research. We want to use them. But they are together, sperm and eggs have come together. Here, it's an embryo. What are they? So so the question of when does life begin is not a new one. I mean, this has been around since Talmudic times, where abortion is concerned. And according to Judaism, abortion is only permitted in the case of when the mother's life is at risk, right? So even an embryo, even a fetus, you can't abort him. Even under circumstances, but let's just say, so we're not no time to talk about the delicacies of abortion here, but only if the mother's life is at risk. Then what do you do to the fetus? Even if it's 9 months old, fully shaped, fully formed, you cut the fetus in pieces in order to save the mother's life. Because a mother is a living person, the fetus is yet not a living person, you do it. But besides that extreme case, you cannot touch the fetus. So when does it begin? At conception. Even though we know the old joke, the three religions were brought to Congress. When does life begin? The Catholics said at conception, the Protestants said at the first trimester, and the Rabbi said when the kids are married and the dog's dead. That's when life begins. Okay? And that's so you have different opinions of when life begins. Something like that. So you have here in Judaism. In Judaism, at least, we believe that as soon as it's conception, as soon as there's something in the mother's tummy, the kid has rights. You can't abort that kid. There are some that would allow you before 40 days, but let's just generally speaking. But we're not talking about the embryo and the mother. They're not doing any research on this. We're talking about the embryos that are sitting in a freezer somewhere, and there's millions of them in the country right now. What do you do with them? So President Bush came from the opinion that this is fundamentalist. These are children. These are people. They have rights. And his suggestion is, you remember what President Bush used to say? What to do with the embryos? Adopt what? Adopt them out. That's what he would say. Don't use them. Because you have to destroy them. If you're going to do research, what you're doing with them, you're destroying them. So you can't destroy them. So he forbade Congress from doing any type of research on stem cell research. Okay. And then he used to use the Rose Garden as a picture op for children that were born through these adoptive embryos. right? Adoptive embryos. So he took a position. This was his position. This was President Bush, and he comes from a religious part, and there was a whole section of the United States of America that applauded him for this. That he took a tough stand on this, and he wouldn't give in. Fine, that was what. President Bush leaves office, and President Obama comes into office. And what does President Obama do? President Obama says all the restrictions that Bush put upon stem cell research is off. You do whatever you have to do. That, to him it's more important, the amount of information we can get to help diseases that are killing the United States of America. And remember, diabetes and paralysis, everything like that. Go for it. Go for it. Take them and use them. There's millions and millions. You don't have to worry about it. We don't have to recreate new ones. We have so many already sitting frozen in the freezer. Go for it. Do research.
Is that what they're doing now?
What? That's what they're doing now. He has opened up the gateways, and scientists are very appreciative of this. No. Where does Judaism come in? Where they go Bush, go Obama. Bush now. In all theory, if I said to you this, where do you think, after the discussion tonight, Orthodox Jewry, I'm not talking about Jewry in general, we're talking halachic Jewry, what do you think it would come down to? Bush or Obama? Bush. You would think so, right? You would think, because in Judaism, an embryo is it's important. As a kid, sperm and egg together, this is Kodesh Kodashim, this is the Holy of Holies. I hate to break the news to you. Most poskim would tell you that as long as the embryo is not implanted into the mother, it's nothing. It's nothing. Go for it. And you could read here a number of, and I'm not going to read for you from the federally funded, that you could learn yourself. From time immemorial, look at page 130. Look at page 130. From time immemorial, scientists and philosophers argued about when life begins. From a pure scientific viewpoint, it's impossible to answer this query. In fact, it's impossible to define scientifically the very term life. Indeed, the definition of life and the beginning of life involves religious, ethical, legal, and social considerations. Similarly, from time immemorial, scientists and philosophers have debated the status of the embryo. There has been and continues to be a great dispute as to whether or not the embryo has an independent claim for life, or whether or not it possesses the status of an independent person. This is Dr. Abraham Steinberg, Jewish Perspectives and Discovery of Ethical Ethics, by Shraga Blazer and Eitan Zimmer. Okay, so this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the debate. Another moral issue pertains to the question whether or not there is a moral distinction between an embryo that is already implanted and developed in utero compared with a pre-embryo in a test tube after in vitro fertilization is performed. So it's a pre-embryo. It's not even an embryo, it's a pre-embryo in a test tube. Again, according to him. There are some, now I'm going to read to you from a point that you do not have. There are some poskim who maintain that the prohibition against abortion can be waived in some instances prior to 40 days. I mentioned to you before. Because the baby, even after 40 days, is not yet taken fully shape and form. Okay, fine. Okay? So now, what's the problem with hurting an embryo? What's the problem of that? It will be considered what? Murder. Right? If you're going to kill an embryo, if you're going to destroy an embryo, it's going to be like murder, right? What's abortion? What's the problem with abortion? Why can't you do an abortion? Kid's not living independently. If you took the mother away from the kid and you took out the kid can't live. The kid is only living dependent upon the mother in the stomach. So why would it be abortion? Why would abortion be murder? So they learn it from a pasuk in the Torah. There's a verse in the Torah, in portion of Noah, when God, after he comes out of the flood, there's a prohibition against suicide. How do we know there's a prohibition against suicide? Why can't you kill yourself? Why not? Because there's a prohibition we take from the words in what he says to Noah to explain to us that you can't kill yourself. The words are like this. Listen to the words. Shoifech dam ha'adam beha'adam. Shoifech dam ha'adam. Spilling of the blood in the man. Beha'adam. Inside the man. Okay. Spilling the blood of the man inside of the man. When are you inside of the man? Who is that referring to? The baby. The baby is inside the woman's stomach. So killing a baby inside the womb of a mother is murder, according to Maimonides. Because sheifech dam ha'adam beha'adam. Killing the man inside of the man. So what does this preclude?
It is life.
No, it is life. So once it's in the mother's stomach, it's life. But what does that preclude? Abortion. What's the exception to this rule? a pre-embryo, right? According to this teaching, right? If we went strictly shayfrich dam ba'adam, killing of the man inside the be'adam, inside the man, would exclude what? Pre-embryos, right? That means if you fertilize 20 eggs, right, and you only implanted 5 eggs into the woman, the other 15 would be considered pre-embryo, right? According to what so he says, for this reason, he writes, it is permitted to destroy the remaining pre-embryos, okay, if they're not needed, once we see that the mother is conceived and gestation is developing positively. She's pregnant, everything is going well. It is my humble opinion, there is not even a doubt that needs to be considered about the destruction of life or potential life. For we only need be concerned once it is in utero and has some classification of life for it to eventually develop into a full life. This is not so regarding in vitro fertilization, where without implantation, these pre-embryos will never develop into living human beings. Obviously then, they cannot be referred to as life. Even the life of a fetus. Before implantation into the womb, there is no law protecting the pre-embryo. It is considered to be like a male seed, not at all like a fetus. So who would he come down to? What so Reb Shmuel Levi wasn't, the Shevet Levi would agree with whom? Obama. With Obama. And most poskim would go with that. Most poskim would say, hey, there's no reason to defend these people's lives. We must remember that this is he writes, President Bush. Okay. Rabbi, what? There's no pain. I don't think there's pain. Then what are they? Nothing. They're frozen.
It would be to 9 months.
Oh, to 9 months? Oh, sure, because they're formed, yes. I don't think there's any pain to the pre-embryo. Rabbi Wazner also points out that here's a question. Can you violate Shabbos for these pre-embryos? See, for a baby, absolutely, right? I'm not talking about a baby, I'm talking about a fetus. I'm not talking about a baby, born baby, but a fetus. Can you, if God forbid the mother starts bleeding or something like that, can you rush her to the hospital to save the fetus? If you even hesitate 1 second, you're a shayfich dam. If you hesitate 1 second, you're a murderer, right to the fetus. What about to the pre-embryos? Is there if there's a fire in the laboratory, you allowed to put it out in order to save them on Shabbos? No. You know. There's no why, because according to the Shevet Levi, according to Rabbi Wazner, they do not have the definition of life. They're not life. So go ahead and do it. Now you're going to read from President Bush, we must consider the embryonic stem cells come embryos that are destroyed for the cells. Each of these human embryos is a unique human life. Okay, so he figures a unique human life. All right, you could read it yourself over there. You don't have to.
Wouldn't be using it.
What?
It is considered life because they're using it to further life.
Well, it's helping us develop life. I don't know if it'd be considered. Let's use it as long. This is not for me. This is the Masa Chaysh of Rabbi Halpern. Okay, as long as it has not been implanted in the womb and is still frozen, fertilized egg, it does not have the status of an embryo at all, and there's no prohibition to destroy it. However, in order to remove all doubt as to the permissibility of destroying, there's a rule not to destroy the pre-embryo unless it was otherwise not be implanted in the woman who gave the eggs. Okay, so you ask the guy, are you going to use the eggs? No? Fine, let's go. Either because there are many fertilized eggs or because one of the parties refuses to go on with the procedure, the husband, whatever. Certainly it should not be implanted into another woman. So he's completely against this idea of passing them out now as adoption. The best and worthiest solution is to use for life-saving procedures, such as the treatment of people who have suffered trauma to their nervous system, etc., etc., etc. So here you will see here clearly that Judaism would come down on where? Was definitely with Obama, right? Now, so we have here, so we said, we went through 4 of the 5 categories. We went through the importance of having children. If you can't have children, number 1. If you can't have children, number 1 about a donor. Can you have a donor? According to Judaism, no. What about a husband? Yes, under certain procedures. What about stem cell research? Which most people will be shocked at. If you ask the average person, you think about Judaism, can you do stem cell research? They would say, no, God forbid, no. Judaism says, yes, if you could save a life and help a life and do something, most authorities would go. I'm sure there's some going to say no. I'm sure you'll find the odd guys going to say, nah, don't do it. But most say. Now comes the position, what if nothing works? Nothing works. You try this, you try that, you try everything, and only a certain percentage work. of in vitro fertilization. It's not everyone is 100%. It's only a small percentage. Less than 50% actually do it. What happens? So first of all, these people have to understand, Einis Rachamana Patra. The Torah exempts someone who has not fulfilled the obligation due to circumstances beyond their control. If a guy ends up in prison, or God forbid he doesn't have tefillin, or some Einis Rachamana Patra. Okay, you can't help it. It's beyond your control. That's the first thing. That you have because people worry, I have not fulfilled the mitzvah. 613 mitzvahs, one of the most important mitzvahs is pruervu, to be fruitful and to multiply. Number 2, if one has good intentions, it's as bad as if you've done it already. If a person tries to fulfill the mitzvah and wants to do the mitzvah, page 134, not a problem. Go ahead, and then you get credit for trying. And the Torah says, if one has good intentions, it's like one already has done it. Okay? Whoever raises an orphan in his home is considered by the Torah as if he had given birth to him. That means if you take an orphan and you raise him, this is from the Talmud and Sanhedrin, and you raise them, this is your child. And we talked about, I don't know if we talked about it last week, but I had this discussion a few years ago, if you remember the case of the child that was adopted by parents, and then the biological, he was about 6 years old already, and the biological parents then came and they wanted to take the kid back. The courts ruled with the biological parents. There's a whole debate going on over here, and about adoption, good, bad, good, bad. It came out clearly that adoption is as, the parents are as loving as biological parents. And you know what? To break the news to you, sometimes even more. Where the biological parents are schmendricks, they had the kids, they didn't think what they're going to do, but adoptive parents love their kids equally as much, there's no question about it. And if you raise a kid, it's your kid 150% of, no question about it. Rav Shmuel Rachmani went even further. Not only raise him, whoever teaches his colleagues' children Torah is considered by the Torah as if he had given birth to him. That was one of the things we always used to say. Here was a Lubavitcher Rebbe that literally gave out in his lifetime thousands of blessings for children. If I'm telling you thousands, I'm it's the under. Thousands and thousands of blessings for children, and he could not produce one kid. So they were married from 1928, and she died in 1988. They were married 60 years, okay, and they didn't have any children. So we said, how could it be? We always wondered ourselves, how could it possibly be that the Rebbe could give so many brachas? He could get this guy a kid, that guy a kid, that guy a kid. And I could tell you from my own experience, I had someone tell me to my face that they were a blessing from the Rebbe. When I was in Boston and in the Chabad house, I made an organization meeting the first week I was there. So a bunch of kids showed up. So one kid, I said, would anybody like to be the president of Chabad Student Club at BU, Boston University? A guy's hand shot up. I'll be the president. And he was a modern Orthodox kid. He was already connected to Hillel, and he didn't need Chabad. But after a few months, we became very close friends, very, very close. And one night we're sitting in the car, we're talking, we're schmoozing, and he says to me, Rabbi, weren't you surprised a few months ago when I raised my hand? I said, I will tell you a story. My parents could not have children. My parents could not have children. This guy, he's telling me this story. I'm not reading this in some fantasy book. Okay, I'm sitting in the car, and the guy's telling me this. So the rabbi, he's from Chicago, Rabbi Schusterman. I don't know if you were familiar with the B'nai Reuven shul in Chicago. And he said to them, listen, you know what? Write a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. What could you lose? The Rebbe gives a lot of blessings. You'll write a letter. So they wrote a letter to the Rebbe. The Rebbe sent back an answer. They said, you know what? If the woman decides to keep the laws of mikveh and the laws of tarsa mishpacha, the laws of family purity, that they'll refrain from having relations while she's menstruating, and she'll go to the mikveh properly. And Mitzvah Hashem, few months go by, nothing's going on there. Rabbi Schusterman calls back the couple. What's any news? No. He says, you know what? Let's try again to answer, to write the letter. They write again a letter, and this time he gets back an answer within a few hours. Usually Rebbe took sometime a day, depending upon the situation. In a few hours, the Rabbi Groner called him and says, whoa, so what's going on? Rabbi Schusterman says, what's happening? Rabbi Groner says, the Rebbe sent out the letter, and he underlined, I've already advised her to go to the mikveh. What does that mean? I've already advised her to go to the mikveh. So Rabbi Schusterman called him up and said, I think you should come to my office. They came to the office, and Rabbi Schusterman said, the Rebbe answered, he's already advised you to go to the mikveh. She broke down and started to cry. and she said she didn't go. She was skeptical, and she didn't go to the mikveh. So Rabbi Shusterman said, listen, you can't fool around with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You're either going to follow his advice or not follow his advice. It's to bother him and waste his time. So she decided then she's going to the mikveh. And kid turns to me and says, I'm the product of that mikveh. Says, I'm the one kid they had. They only had one kid, and I'm the product of that thing. So I see in front of my eyes, this was to me a living testament. This wasn't a Lubavitcher telling me stories on a plane flying here, there, and he met a guy you never knew. Those stories also happened, but this is a real visual that I had with the kid. So we always thought about, what's going on over here? The Rebbe himself, for his own family, can't put out one kid, at least one kid. So I always said this Gemara. If someone teaches his colleague's child Torah, it is considered by the Torah as if he had given birth to him. Aaron bore children, and Moses taught them. Therefore, they are called the children of Moses. And that's why the Rebbe had thousands and thousands and thousands of children, right? That's why it's important. We have what he writes over here, that it's important to have open adoption, to tell you who you come from, where you come from, so we shouldn't have any problems with this pedigree. Just know, look, you're adopted. But you see, I don't know why, but to my parents' generation, adoption was like, I was always worried, maybe I'm adopted. I was about as close, I'm like a twin with my father. We walk the same, we hunch out the same, we have the same wrists, hands, there's no question. But I was always, what if I'm adopted? I don't know by us, adopted. We knew one kid that was adopted. He's adopted. Don't say anything, he's adopted. Oh, adoption. But there's nothing wrong with adoption. As a matter of fact, there's a doctor here in town. He adopted 2 girls. He told me that he took this position with them. As soon as they're old enough, he told them, look, we want to be honest with you. We adopted you. We love you. We adopted you. Because he said there was a story that he grew up in South Africa, and he had a friend who grew up with Holocaust survivor parents. This kid was about 6'4". His parents were about 5 feet, the father, and 4'10", the mother. And the kid could never understand what's going on. But his parents explained to him that they're short because they didn't have any food in Poland. But he's living in South Africa, so they fed him better. So that's why he grew up thinking that he has very short parents in Kachava. His parents passed away, and at the Shiva, you know how people talk at the Shiva, she's such a nice lady, she adopted you and everything. And he goes, what? He says, yeah, you didn't know. There's always the yentis. There's always the Jewish yentis that open up their mouths at the most inopportune time. And he found that he was adopted. So he went to search his adopted parents, and it turned out that his mother was an 18-year-old girl, and she gave him up for adoption, and that she remarried, she has a family. And then the day came, and they said, please, we'd love to meet you. And he walks into the house. He sees brothers and sisters. One brother is 6'5", another brother is 6'4", his sister is 5'10". Oh, now I feel at home. Now he figured out. Now he finally figured where he came from before. So these people, Lilliputians, that they were running around over there. Here he is. So open adoption is probably the best policy. And then he quotes the Hashem says that tell the people that even if they haven't produced, if they're steadfast in their faith, I will give them a place and a name. Now, what's a place and a name in Hebrew? And how would you say a place and a name? Yad V'Shem. You ever heard of something like that called Yad V'Shem? What's Yad V'Shem? What? The memorial in Yerushalayim is for the Holocaust memorial. It's called Yad V'Shem. It's taken from the verses here in Isaiah that Hashem says to the people, I will give you a place and a name better than sons and daughters. An everlasting name I will give you, which will never be discontinued. As long as even if you're infertile, but if you're connected to Hashem, you don't have to worry. If you try to do the best that you possibly can, Hashem will reward you. So the Torah, on one hand, is very, very much to have children and documents the inner pain of those that don't have, like Rachel and Chana and all of those guys. While society recognizes the right to have children, the Torah sees it not as a right, but as a obligation. Thank you. The use of donor sperm raises serious concerns regarding the structure of the family, so therefore donor sperm is prohibited. Thank you. Artificial insemination for the husband is generally permitted as long as its oversight is good. even though, despite current debate raging about embryonic stem, research Jewish law has no objection to the destruction of unused pre-implanted embryos. No problem whatsoever. Using unused pre-embryos research is preferable to giving them to other couples for adoption. Those who are unable to fulfill the mitzvah, despite reasonable attempts, have fulfilled their obligation, and God considers it as if the mitzvah has been fulfilled. And this is the most important part. People ask you, there is no obligation to pursue artificial reproductive therapies in the quest to have children. There's no obligation. This is done totally voluntarily. People want to do it, it's fine, but it's not like you have to keep Shabbos or you have to keep kosher. There's no obligation whatsoever. There is great merit in raising orphans or mentoring others in their spiritual development. Every person can forge an eternal legacy by being good people. Thank you very much.